Okay, so yeah, just to remind everybody that these calls are recorded and will subsequently be uploaded to YouTube for anyone to view. But welcome to the Zcash Arborist call for February the 23rd, 2023. Every time I say 2023, I really feel like we're living in the future. So let me try and make this actual slideshow. Does that still look good to people? I'll assume someone will let me know if it isn't.
Beautiful.
So today's agenda, we're just going to do a quick welcome and intro to the meeting for anybody who's new and doesn't know what's going on, and hear from the Zcash Foundation engineers about what's going on with Zebra. We'll hear about the what's going on with the ECC engineering team, any research and implementation status updates, and then we'll move on to open discussion. What are Arborist calls? Well, these are bi-weekly calls where people who contribute to the development of the Zcash protocol come to discuss upgrade timelines, processes, what's going on with protocol R&D, all of the cool stuff that we all work on, and to coordinate, give updates to one another, and to deconflict any blockers or issues that we need to collaborate on. The purpose is to make development of the Zcash protocol more open and accessible to anybody who wants to participate, and to provide transparency for the community who have decided to fund the development through the Dev Fund. And who can participate? Anyone. Anyone who wants to join and listen in on these calls is more than welcome to do so. They can register. If you're watching on YouTube, you can go to electriccoin.co/events, and you should find a link there to be able to register for these Zoom webinars. And if you want to present something, whether it's about a grant that you received from Zcash Community Grants, or a proposal that you'd like to present to the Zcash community, then drop an email to Ian at Electric Coin Company, and he will be able to coordinate scheduling a presentation slot. Other ways to get involved are to apply for a Zcash community grant. They fund ongoing development work by new teams entering the Zcash ecosystem. We've also just this week launched a new grants program called Zcash Minor Grants, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Filecoin and the Electric Coin Company also have a grant program for projects that will benefit both the Filecoin and Zcash ecosystems. There's an R&D Discord where members of the Zcash community come together to communicate and collaborate. And then finally, last but not least, there is the Zcash Community Forum, where lots of discussion and debate and other types of interactions take place on a regular basis. Let's start off hearing from the from the Zcash Foundation team about what the latest is with Zebra.
Hello, I'll give the Zebra update today. So we're actually in the process of releasing Zebra RC5, which brings a couple of updates. The main one is that we finished the mining-related RPCs, and that makes Zebra ready for testing with mining pools. So if there are any mining pool operators on this call, or if anyone's watching on YouTube, I would like to encourage you to try Zebra and let us know how it goes. The next thing is that we fixed a little regression with Light Wallet D, and Zebra now supports the latest version of Light Wallet D. And we also made non-finalized chain rollbacks instant, because before Zebra was recomputing the node commitment trees when there was a non-finalized rollback, but now Zebra stores the trees in its database and fetches the right tree when there is a rollback. And then we have a couple of smaller improvements, such as the duplication of the red palace code. And one more important thing that I have here is that Zebra now implements the settled network upgrade consensus rule. So it checks if it's following the consensus chain each time it starts. And
excellent.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek. Do we also have an update on Frost this week?
I have a little update.
Go for it.
So we're doing a little project planning on how we're doing basically an end-to-end proof of concept of how to do Frost signing in a distributed setting. So little binaries to show how different processes can do key setup and can do signing of an arbitrary message. And then that will be a kind of like a demo for people to build off of when they're trying to build Frost into their own applications. Part of that work will be a library that we're sketching out that will bootstrap this proof of concept from like real bare bones, like copy pasting messages between terminals, to a networking library that will handle the authenticated channels that you need to do this over the network. And then the implementation of a broadcast channel protocol that we have been researching about the simplest, easiest, clearest way to do this in a small scale setting, so that we can demonstrate what a end-to-end setting, a secure setting for Frost looks like. And then we can tell people, here is a way to do it. You need these properties to do Frost key setup and then signing. So as long as your application has properties like this proof of concept that we have, this toy, then you can scale up as needed. So we're doing project planning for that and starting the very beginning of that sort of work, and we'll keep you posted.
What are you using for the authenticated channel? TLS, noise?
Noise.
Noise.
Probably the IK pattern. That is the easier part. And the current plan is to use a specification of echo broadcast over those channels, and then the API we will provide is just sort of send message to the channel, the broadcast channel. And we'll try to make that API as kind of simple and clear as possible for anyone wanting to do a kind of multi-party computation thing. But our goals are to make it very small, clear, correct. Our goals are not scaling, but that's also kind of like a secondary or tertiary stage of our sort of Frost end-to-end proof of concept toy. But yeah, we'll be using noise. That's an easier choice.
I approve.
Okay, any more questions on Zebra or Frost? Okay, let's move on to ECC's updates.
Cool. I can handle those. So yeah, last Arborist call was 2 weeks ago, and we had just released 5.4.0. Which had various changes, including like transparent pool, chain tracking supply and stuff. To use those, you had to reindex. There was a known issue related to some lag related to the wallet updates. That got fixed, and we released that in a 5.4.1 along with another thing that became apparent when we released 5.4.0, which was that the feature deprecation framework that we rolled out in 5.0.0 worked if you specified config options on the command line, but not in the config file. And people noticed, because 5.4.0 is also where we deprecated a bunch of features. Well, we moved a bunch of deprecated features from stage 1 to stage 2. As a reminder, the feature deprecation framework is so that we can deprecate features, and it goes through a two-stage process where we first mark features as deprecated and announce it in the release notes, and provide a flag that you can use to like mark it off so that you can preemptively disable it to work out what is going to cause problems. And then at minimum of 18 weeks later, we do the movement to stage 2, where we default disable it, but you can use that flag to re-enable it to keep using your existing use case while you figure, if you haven't at that point figured out how to migrate. And a bunch of people started needing to do that, and we turned out that the config option had somehow broken in the config file. So we released a 541 that fixed that. So people can now configure deprecated features in the config options, didn't need to alter on the CLI. But as we have, as a result of that, also had various issues that have been opened up the issue tracker. Thank you. Please open more of them if you have issues with things that you have now found are deprecated. The way that we want to do this deprecation process is that this is one of the steps that enables us to learn how people are relying on things that we want to deprecate, so that we can ensure that we have a migration pathway to features that are not being deprecated, or like new or supported features. Cool. So that's there. In terms of other things that have gone on in the last couple of weeks, we've made a bunch of progress on various other cleanups, including we started retroactively applying zip 216 to Zcashd, and that is also active, I think, in 541. Zip 216 was related to some specifics about how certain non-canonical jub points were allowed to be encoded. And we have since confirmed that everything that's visible to consensus is satisfied prior to the network upgrade 5, satisfy the zip 216 rules. So we can just pretend that they were always active, which makes the code simpler. It does technically mean that a wallet that could have been sent something that was violating zip 216, but as far as we can tell, those funds would never have been spendable anyway due to other things that already existed in the code base. So no existing wallet user should be impacted by the Rust changes related to that. But yeah, on the Rust side, we were making a bunch of changes to improve the type safety of the various APIs and things, and that's rolled out in that's rolling out in the next release of the crates, which will happen at some point in the near future. Other useful things, I don't think anything else has merged into those crates. On the Rust crate side, a recent addition to the APIs was a split transaction creation mechanism. So the existing transaction builder and things that we have available for those who are using the light clients, previously it was just a one-shot API to send a transaction to a given recipient, or send a transaction using a zip 321 transaction URI. But now there is the ability to, in the latest current release, to do a two-stage API where you first propose a transaction via a zip, so the user provides a 321 URI that says, I want to send this many funds to these recipients, and so on. And you will get back a transaction proposal. That is what the wallet says, okay, given the funds I have access to and what you've told me what you want to do, this is what I think is the best option for you to create. And that will then, from that, you can then figure out things like, okay, what kind of privacy property does it have? What kind of fee is it going to require, and stuff like that. And the idea of this is that then, instead of only finding that out by like trying and then looking at error messages for like, oh, you didn't have enough funds, or not being able to choose to use a weaker privacy policy in order to spend funds that otherwise you might not be able to, or whatever. This is now information that can be figured out up front as part of these APIs. So that style of API will, in the near future, be rolled into the through the FFIs into like the mobile SDKs, and we're also working on a similar exposing similar doing some refactorings inside Zcashd that will enable similar kinds of RPCs to be provided in Zcashd itself, which will let us migrate away from, again, the single shot Z send many and so on, to instead having this two-phase, check what is going to happen and check you're happy with it, and then commit to doing so. And yeah, I think that's everything I can think of.
The only other thing I would mention is that we are, I think, nearing completion on a ZIP 317 block construction implementation. The implementation is essentially complete. We're just now working through all of the RPC tests that made assumptions about fixed fees and fixing those up as we go. So it'll be rather thoroughly tested by the time it's released.
Yeah, excellent.
That was what I was going to mention as well.
Yes, and related to that, because we just actually had a thought about that today, the current Zcashd RPCs, the Zcashd RPC uses a positional JSON RPC mechanism, which means that you can't specify later arguments without specifying earlier ones. And one of the arguments that exists in a bunch of existing RPCs is the fee. So we're considering ways at the moment to allow people to specify a fee that at some value in the fee slot that it indicates I want to use the default fee, rather than having to explicitly encode it, which will let the ZIP 317 rules just do what they want from the wallet perspective. Most likely that will just be specify -1 in that position, but obviously the release notes for the relevant release will contain that. Yeah, and then I guess the other thing that I should mention is that we're still making progress on DAG sync style stuff. We're primarily working on the incremental Merkle crate related to that. There's PRs open being in the process of being reviewed there.
Who was first, Nate or Teo?
I saw Teo first, so.
Okay.
Yes, so I know we've talked about this in the zip editors sync, but did you make many changes to the sort of fee filtering rules for the mempool as part of the block construction changes?
So ZIP 317 says basically that well, the ZIP 401 random message drop when the mempool gets full, that had a component that was dependent on whether you were paying at least the conventional fee, and that gets updated to use the new conventional fee. But apart from that, I don't think we're making other changes. We haven't made any other changes yet.
Yeah, well, the only other relevant change is that because Zcashd's mempool allows storing packages of transactions, where specifically transparent transactions, where you can create a transaction that creates some transparent coins, and then you can spend those coins in a zero conf transaction. That's behavior Zcashd inherited from Bitcoin, so we've got it there. That adds an implicit requirement on ordering to the transactions. So there's a slight modification to the block selection algorithm where it still selects randomly per ZIP 317, but any time it selects something randomly that can't be immediately added to the block, it gets added to a queue, and then the moment that the parent of that transaction gets randomly selected, we then go through the queue, and any child that becomes immediately eligible gets popped in prioritized into a different queue to immediately go through. So the random selection is still like single selection from the initial ZIP 317, but then there is minor reordering from that random selection process, essentially to resolve any parent-child relationships within the mempool, which can mean that you might select, say, a child transaction, and originally you might sample it, and then because you never sample its parent before the block's full, the child just gets dropped from that case. And that's just part of what you would expect out of ZIP 317.
Yeah, and I think, so we haven't implemented this yet, but I expect we will make a change to the relay policy so that if a single transaction has more than 50 unpaid actions, then it probably won't be relayed, because it would never get into a block under the zip 317 algorithm.
Yeah, so we've got an open ticket for making that same change in Zebra. I guess what I'm interested in, and maybe we can discuss this in detail at a future zip sync, is making sure that Zebra's mempool filtering rules in terms of fees, things like minimum fees or fees per byte, are reasonably consistent with Zcashd, because we don't have, because our mempool is new, we don't have any of those rules implemented yet, apart from zip 401 for denial of service.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, Nate.
Yeah, so it's kind of a high-level tracking question, and I think I already asked about this, but I just want to check again. So Zebra is adding mining support APIs, and those are ready to test. Meanwhile, Zcashd is upgrading the block proposal RPC to do zip 317. And the question is, is it true Zebra also is implementing the zip 317 rules? And then B, does that mean miners should have a choice now between two full nodes, and both of them will be implementing zip 317 rules?
Yeah, so we actually, because zip 317 was being drafted while we were implementing this, we just implemented zip 317 straight off for our block construction algorithm. So yeah, we've had that implemented for a while. The only piece of zip 317 we don't have implemented is what Dara was just talking about, which is the relay rule. And that's because I think we were waiting on Zcashd and some kind of confirmation that dropping large transactions with low fees from the network was okay. So I guess we were waiting for wallets to update a bit as well. But now we know Zcashd is doing it, we can go ahead and do it.
I'm not sure we made a final decision to do it, but
great.
We can talk about that in the next zip sync, I think.
Yeah. Just let us know. We're happy to do it whenever it's done. But yes, miners should have a choice. Just to be clear, right now, Zebra is kind of experimental test mining with Zebra. We have, I think, one known bug where one of our checks or the concurrency is a bit off, but that only happens very rarely. So almost all the block proposals should be valid, but we do need to make one fix before it's ready for production use.
Yeah, just circling back, I guess what I wanted to know is is the message for mining pools like, hey, at some point in time when Zebra is ready for production and Zcashd has deployed the zip 317 changes, you can choose between these two implementations and it won't affect at all your policy about zip 317 because they both implement the same policy? Or will there be a window in time where the message would have to be, hey, you can switch implementations, but one implementation has a different policy than the other for some period of time? Does that question make sense? I just want to know.
Yeah. So the answer is Zebra will only ever implement zip 317. So if you switch to Zebra, you will have zip 317, and that's it. We never implemented anything else.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
and there are some aspects of, especially relaying, that are sort of quite vaguely specified. We should probably write a zip about them. So those might be different.
Yeah, and obviously there's the things that Zcashd already has that I don't know if Zebra have emulated, which is like the package tracking that I mentioned before, but also there's RPCs that we currently have for like artificially increasing like the fee that you pretend a transaction has and stuff like that to change its priority within the logic, which we are figuring out how to make useful and usable with zip 317.
Yeah,
whether how long we keep those around will be is a separate question. But
yeah, I kind of like to deprecate them. We'll probably make the thing for adjusting the fee that can behave in the same way as it previously did. So it just pretends that you're using a different fee, and then you apply the zip 317 algorithm to that fee. But there's a different priority-based thing that is modified by the same RPC, and I haven't worked out how to handle that yet.
Well, we're essentially getting rid of the priority pieces,
yeah,
which
exactly.
is the same thing that upstream.
So maybe it will just be ignored.
Yeah, because like upstream Bitcoin had already done that from memory. They switched a while back to using solely fee, what they then turned into score when they did SegWit.
Yeah, we'll have to have a look how they changed the prioritized transaction RPC.
But it would be my expectation that if anyone is using similar stacks for Bitcoin and Zcash, at least for the interaction on the RPCs for mining, then it's likely that they aren't using those priority APIs. But yeah, certainly when we do zip 317, the priority piece won't do anything anymore because that priority logic just won't be part of block selection, block construction.
Yeah, I think mining pools do tend to prioritize their mining payouts. But
that can be done with the other.
Yes, it can.
Yeah, that can be done with the existing APIs. Yeah.
So in terms of Zebra, just to kind of answer that question, yeah, there are some more complex features that we didn't implement in our mempool, like as Strad was saying, the transaction packages dependent transparent transactions, and also queuing transactions that might become valid later. Actually, we do in some cases do some queues, and in other cases we don't. But yeah, we haven't heard from any miners who do use those priority RPCs yet. If they do, please reach out and let us know. We're happy to implement new RPCs that are actually needed and used by people.
Yeah, and similarly, if there's RPCs that you use and we know that you're using them, then if we're planning on deprecating them, we can figure out how to service the use case that you're using them for.
Okay, any more questions for the ECC team?
There's one more thing that I forgot to mention in the update section, which was that there's a current issue open regarding issues creating orchard transactions on 32-bit Android devices. I just wanted to, we've already given some updates in the thread, but we're in the issue, but we're also that is something that we are working on internally, and we've already found a couple of bugs that might have been contributing to it. So we're just doing the full look through things and identifying anything that's interfering with the wallet's ability to create valid transactions. So
yeah, there was one bug in incremental Merkle tree and another one in pasta curves.
So yeah, we're just
we'll
continue to chase those down, and we will. Yeah, it looks like basically it will end up just being that once we have appropriate, it should just be patch fixes out on the various crates, that then a cargo update should be sufficient to bring those updates in, and then it should work, given what we're seeing so far. So we'll keep hunting those down.
Tiro.
Yeah, so I wonder if this is related. We in Zebra, we've just found what we think might be a Rust miscompilation in the Halo crates or some of their cryptographic dependencies. So what happens is on Nightly, the test vectors that we share with ECC for Halo proofs fail, but on Stable, they work fine. So yeah, maybe this is separate. Maybe this is related to the errors that wallets are seeing. We're seeing it on x86-64 on Nightly. We haven't actually checked any other architectures. So yeah, I've posted in the thread.
That sounds like it's probably a separate thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
The things we found would affect all 32-bit platforms. So all platforms were usize as 32 bits.
Yeah, but yeah, this seems more likely to be a breakage in Nightly because those do happen. But it would be interesting to figure out what that problem is, so we can chat about that offline and see what's going on.
Great.
I mean, it's always fun to find actual miscompilations in the in the Rust library, in the Rust compiler. I've yet to trigger an ICE though, an internal compiler error. I know a few people who have. I'm still holding out for one of those.
We did a few months ago with one of our just as in iterator, but that was an ICE in beta Rust. It made it to beta and then it got patched.
Okay, any more questions for the ECC team? Okay, we'll move on. I think the next item on the agenda is research and implementation status updates, but I'm not sure we have anybody on from Kedit or any other team who might want to give such updates.
You've already mentioned the Frost updates, which would otherwise go here. Yeah, I mean, as far as from the zip editor's side of things, we're continuing to have meetings with Kedit to iterate on the editorial side of the ZSA zips. So making good progress there.
Nate?
Yeah, I'm interested in finding like a long form venue for research discussions. Yeah, I'm just letting people know I'm interested in that and wondering how we could set one up and where it should be. So I'm thinking like long form and asynchronous. So Discord doesn't work very well for that purpose because it's more chat oriented. So I'm putting the call out there and plan on discussing that with different groups and seeing what would work best for everyone. Does that sound like something people here would value? Or do we already have good options?
There used to be a regular science call, wasn't there?
Yeah, I'm thinking asynchronous though. So like a forum. So maybe it could potentially be a place in Zcash forum or something else. I'm sort of what's an example? I really like ETH research, so I think it might be a discourse forum, but just the framing and the participation there. I'd love to get stuff like that going for Zcash.
So with the community forums, we can create separate sections that are permissioned to a specific group of people. And in fact, we did this recently for I think it was for the wallet team, or the mobile wallet group. So we can create a separate section of the Zcash community forum. It can be visible to the rest of the world or private, entirely private. And you can just simply create a group and we can make different people managers of that group and allow them to invite and add more people to that group. And it means then that you don't get that sort of situation where anybody can just join and post in a topic. It's very much permission to a specific group, and like I said, it can be public or it can be entirely private.
Okay, cool. I'll check that out.
Cool. Well,
And I guess another piece is trying to find folks who I was thinking might be interested in posting there and seeing what they want or need. But I perceive there's a need.
Cool. Well, we can definitely that's definitely a solution that we can have working, if not already, within in a very short space of time. We have that functionality available to us.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Tior.
Yeah, so I was interested in a bit more of an update on the ZSA progress. Do we have kind of a vague timeline for when ZSAs might be ready to integrate into Zcashd and Zebra, or I guess, I don't know if we're calling that NU6 yet, but yeah, I'm very interested in when that work might be able to start, but I totally understand if we don't know yet.
We don't know yet, but I'm hoping that they will go into NU6.
We do know that Kitted have been working on like an implementation integration already. And like we know that they have, for example, a version of a circuit that implements a version of the ZSA zips. Whether it's the one that ends up aligning with what comes out of the zip editorial process is another matter. But we'll because for instance, and one of the things that came up in the most recent discussion with them was whether we keep the Orchard dummy note system around, or if we coalesce on the split note system. I know at the time, like months ago when we discussed this, we discussed this particular point, and at the time I think there were good reasons for keeping dummy notes around for Orchard, but I can't remember them now. So we need to go back and review.
I can't remember them either.
Yeah, we need to go back and review those kinds of earlier discussions we had around it to sort of make sure that, like, in the meandering process to getting to where we are now, that we've sort of, either like made sure we haven't forgotten any of the early rationales, for instance. As far as the integration goes, I certainly haven't been discussing it directly with them yet, other than generally pointing them toward in Arborist calls towards like the feature logic and Zcashd and things. But I've not had specific questions from them. It would be good to, if they are working on that part of the implementation, to chat with them a bit more about the implementation specifically, so that the implementation they're working on is more likely to be integrated easily into a node rather than needing adapting.
Yeah, I think that may have had something to do with compatibility with existing notes, because obviously there can already be zero-valued notes for sapling and orchard. Yeah, I have to think about it.
Yeah, because like technically you can like use a note that was previously created, but it's just tracing through the binding of what it all ties to and things. So yeah.
Well, remember that there is no so for new assets, there will need to be an on-chain issuance transaction that has the effect of making a particular asset base valid. So we would have to treat ZEC as a special case because there is no such transaction for ZEC. Because it has to use the existing value base.
I don't think that would be specifically necessary. No, remember the way the split note idea works is that you're binding to an existing note that exists.
Oh right, yeah, you can use any ZEC note for that.
Right,
okay.
yeah. So that wouldn't have been the rationale. Anyway,
Anyway.
it's an open task to go back and check what our earlier rationale was in the earlier Arborist calls, for instance.
Cool. Nate, did you have another question, or is your hand still up?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's sort of a, yeah, I'm tagging along on this one, but it's a tangent. I wish we had an easier time or a better ability to do feature specific test nets. So it feels like that could be really helpful if we could put some effort into that for ZSAs, but especially if we get more teams working on distinct features, if they don't have to coordinate upfront to merge into like main branches on the nodes, and instead they could set up independent test networks. I would love it, especially if they could do that well before zips are finalized, so we can just, people like me can play with a thing, even if it's half-baked or has bugs or has a bad design, just to get a feel for it. So I'm just wondering how we can, as far as I know, doing that kind of effort isn't a priority right now for the ECC engineering team, but I feel like we need to think about that and maybe collaborate across the community to set that up.
It is doable for Zcashd, or at least it's meant to be doable with our feature framework. Yep. So if an upgrade is integrated into Zcashd via the feature framework, then we can just set those features to be enabled at certain fake network upgrades or whatever. And so
I mean, it's not so much enabling features, but Zcashd has the assumption that it's running on either mainnet or testnet. And so running on a different testnet, there would be no separation between that testnet and the global one from Zcashd's point of view.
No, you can add that.
Desirable. Yeah, you just
define another set of parameters. We have mainnet params, testnet params. You just add, like upstream Bitcoin, when they were doing SegWit, they added a segnet for just another temporary global testnet for that. And testnet in a box does effectively the same thing, but just by modifying the parameters to create an independent testnet rather than baking them in. But there's a variety of ways we could choose to do that.
That works.
And that combined with the feature flagging system means that it should be possible for anyone to spin up an arbitrary testnet with whatever set of implemented features that they want. The features just have to be implemented using the feature flagging.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that testnets in the box basically already solved that.
Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up on that, or is it a different question?
Yeah, the follow-up was, I'm not too certain about this, but I feel like testnet in a box plus the Zcashd like command line flags mean, in order to sort of manage which, it feels like in order to manage which testnet you want to join, you have to do networking tricks. Whereas like by contrast, for example, in Ethereum nodes, they have an interface that's something like configuration testnet equals name, arbitrary string, and different node implementations can use the same name, and it's like a persistent public testnet. And taking that approach seems appealing to me, because then as you're running the node, you don't have to care too much about like tweaking network settings to make sure you're connecting to the right network. Would something like that be valuable for this?
Testnet in a box does its own thing entirely, so you don't have that problem at all. And for the other approaches that I described, the networking piece is built into the config settings, I think. So,
but like, let's say Kedit says, hey, we set up a ZSA test network. If they're using testnet in a box, how do I, Nate, open up a new terminal, launch a Zcashd, and connect to their testnet? What steps do I need to go through to make that happen?
That I don't know, but the approach. the other approach I described, it would just be run the binary that they provide.
Yeah.
That would be it, because the set of
I see,
parameters
okay.
that define it, like if you modify the testnet parameters to be a different testnet, that's where you set things like what DNS seeder to use, what network magics to use. Those bits and pieces are all configured there, and you would just enable every previous network upgrade to be enabled by default. So we're just starting from NU5 and ignoring all the previous ones, and then define this fake new network upgrade that activates just the features you want. So the process would be Nate runs the binary that Kedit builds, and it works.
I mean,
if that UX doesn't work, then it needs fixing.
Yes, you have to be running a different fork in order to support the new testnet anyway, for whatever features are supposed to be running on it. So
yeah, because by design, the feature flagging system is meant to ensure that anything that would affect consensus rules is not compiled into our production binaries. So it can be in the Zcashd code base, but we don't want it touching the regular consensus rules until we decide to put it into a network upgrade. As opposed to the network upgrade system where the rules are in there, but they're just not enabled at the height yet. The feature flagging system from memory is more strict.
So then the next follow-up, if they had a fork of Zcash, they could implement the feature flags and the correct settings and sort of hard code it for Zcashd. But now, what's the story for Zebra? And is there any way we could like deduplicate across the nodes and around specifying how do I join the network and what features are present in it? Maybe there's not, but I'm interested in seeing the how-to for both nodes, how to join a feature-specific testnet, because I just feel like that would help the whole ecosystem start developing much earlier against specific features. Well, like much earlier than has been the status quo for Zcash.
I guess that's a question for me. So Zebra has just implemented a mainnet and testnet selection. We do have all our parameters in one or two modules, so they are reasonably easy to change. The way that I think I would recommend doing this is the way that we've been doing existing features in Zebra, which is to use Rust feature flags, which is very similar to the model that Strad was just talking about, where the features affect the consensus rules, so they're not actually enabled unless you use a specific flag when you're compiling. And in that case, you would do things like change the default DNS seeder to a DNS seeder that has been set up for this new testnet. So that's actually a piece of work that needs to be done for every new testnet. Or change or add some default nodes in, which is something that's possible. And then just configure your testnet on a different port with a different network magic. All of these things, some of these things are in the config, and some of them you'd have to do using the feature. But yeah, basically it would just be using the Rust feature system, and then you could compile with that. You can do that in your fork. You can push a PR to our fork if it's something we're looking for.
I saw Deirdre's hand up. I have one more follow-up on this topic, but is it same topic?
Yeah. To make it easy to have a general client connect to a general testnet, not the testnet that we currently talk about, from multiple compatible projects, there needs to be some collaboration and they have to deploy them. And so that already seems to happen for testnet, but barely. I think this is a hard problem for a non-developer user or a user that can't get the experimental branch and get it running, because that is where experimental designs or experimental features live. Getting them, like, Zebra has a few longish running instances, but they run off of our main branch, and that they change almost every day. The experimental branches might be even more volatile. So I guess I'm basically saying, I think what I hear you saying from just sort of, I want to try some new experimental stuff on an experimental testnet and make that easy for everyone to experiment on, is harder to do in a cross implementation compatible way. So I would say we should just leverage the use of testnet, the current testnet, in my opinion.
Yeah, the related to that is I would be interested, Nate, in because I don't know a lot about exactly how these like extra Ethereum testnets and things work and how they actually differ. I would be interested in knowing what how those differentiations are done, because at least in the case of these features, it's not simply there's a common configuration that one can set up. It's also necessary that both node implementations implement those consensus rules in precisely the same way to be interoperable. And that is, yeah, that is not a just copy a config thing over. That's a lot of extra engineering involved.
Yeah.
So it's, the testnets are useful once you've done that engineering. It's possible to then like agree on the settings of the network and stuff like that and just hard code those in, but it feels like the hard part is the engineering prior to agreeing on what those settings are going to be. And certainly once the engineering gets to the point where like the consensus rules are not the thing that's being tested, and it's mostly like, you know, wallet level testing and things like that, then having, you know, a common testnet or common multiple testnets seems like that could be potentially beneficial. So instead of there being, you know, the one main testnet that, you know, we upgrade the next network upgrade on there prior to the next one, you could imagine having like, once ZSAs, as you know, have a working consensus version that the nodes agree on, there could be a long running testnet that people use, you know, while things are working on it to develop their app level features in advance of it being deployed to a testnet. And that, if that's the functionality that people actually want out of the long running testnets, that could be something beneficial to then make easier to configure in the main nodes. But for the development of the consensus feature itself, it's already enough of a hands-on process that I'm not sure that making the network configuration part easy would help much, at least.
Okay, I have I guess a different mindset, but I guess there's two things. So the first is maybe a really good next step would be we, like both of these teams, collaborate on making a how to set up a testnet guide. Because here's a question. We're not quite sure who's going to do the work. If Hedit's going to do it, do they know all of these steps? Like, do they know how to set up a seeder, how to make forks of both nodes, what parameters to change in both nodes, et cetera, et cetera? So maybe giving them a guide, and they're our first test user, like, here's a guide on how to set up a testnet, and it might be sparse, or it might just be, you know, a launching off point for them, would be a way for us to get feedback, like what do we need to make it easier to set up testnet. But the second thing was the mindset shift, and you started going there, Strad, but like I personally would love it if I could get a development test version of a wallet and connect, and it has prototype UIs for ZSA stuff. I can connect it to the ZSA testnet and experiment with it. So as quickly as possible. So instead of we roll out the protocol, we do the consensus changes, we set up the test network, we get wallet, we update Light Wallet D, then we update wallets, and then they start doing it. Instead of doing it in that sequence, is there any way we could sort of front load as much of that as possible, like as soon as possible from, so let me tell a different story. So it's not for ZSAs. I just have some crazy idea for a protocol feature I want to do. And instead of even thinking about consensus rules, all I do on day one is set up a test network, and it's just running the main branch of everything. And then day two, I start tweaking consensus rules or whatever and deploying that to that test network. So it's sort of front loading, having a interactive stack that other people can experiment with super early on in the process. Because I have this intuition that might help a lot with rolling out complex changes up in the stack. Maybe not, but it's kind of an ideal.
Oh no, I agree with you there. And the trickiness there is in the, okay, well, what does it actually take to roll out those kinds of features? Because if what you're trying to do is something that requires actually like consensus changes to the consensus rules, then you compile it, you run it, you have a nice testnet running. You then go change it. Well, then you've got to make sure you wipe out all the local state. You've got to make sure that everything you've done is like the current, for example, the current Zcashd. If you change the consensus rules on it, it doesn't know that. What it knows, it isn't compiled with knowledge of all previous consensus rule evolutions that have ever occurred. It just knows that this is the consensus rules I expect to be applied with the local chain state. This is what the local chain state reports, the consensus branch ID that it was using. Those don't match. I have to wipe out a bunch of stuff and keep going. But the weirder and wackier the changes are, the trickier that gets. And so there's a limit to how easy we can make those parts of the work. But for hacking on stuff like I want to be able to hack on the network protocol, or I want to, experiment with different ways that nodes can communicate, but, not fundamentally change things. That kind of stuff could definitely be a lot easier than it currently is.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has to be the way that Strad described, because there are refactorings that we may want to make to the consensus rule code that are not supposed to represent an actual consensus change. And we do those all the time, basically. Well, maybe not all the time, but frequently.
I also did just pull up the our feature system that we implemented in Zcashd, and actually it is not compile time turned off. It appears you actually do define the features in the runtime code.
Runtime.
Yeah, so it is a runtime one that you can actually enable with feature flags at the command line, which is more flexible than I remembered it. Currently not used for anything because we don't have any features that use it, but yeah, what that in theory means is that you could actually just like define a new testnet thing and then just start it up with a particular set of feature flags and define whatever set of consensus rules you want.
Yeah, so a non-trivial example of what I just said, refactoring with the consensus rules that is not supposed to represent a consensus fork, is the change we made to apply zip 216 retrospectively. So that the reason why that is not a consensus fork is that we checked that that those rules applied in all previous blocks on mainnet and testnet. But yeah, you have to actually check.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this would be a good thing for the teams to kind of work on together, because what I'm hearing from Nate about the Ethereum implementation is it's just, you name your testnet in the config and it just works. And I wonder how close we can get to that kind of automatically, picking a new port, picking new network magic, picking all the things that need to be done, starting a DNS seeder. Because the less manual the process is, the easier it is for people to develop new features. And I think that's a helpful use case, but it would take some investment of time from both teams. So we'd probably have to schedule it in.
Strad?
It occurs to me, actually thinking about what Ethereum is, that actually the purpose of those, and again, I don't know this for certain, but it seems likely that the purpose of those multiple test nets is to allow multiple test versions of the global state, as opposed to actually necessarily multiple different sets of consensus rules, because Ethereum has all the programmability on layer 2. And so being able to experiment with like different, setups of the global state, and how they interact, or just like have completely parallel sets of funding for testing and things. Like if the goal of this named config thing is just to set up a parallel version of the existing rules, that seems far more eminently doable and reachable than set up a different thing with a different set of consensus rules, which might be where we would, where Nate's thing on the vision was sort of like, we might have been talking past each other at that point. So it would be useful to look at the Ethereum ones as a case study of like, how do they use the system in general, and then how do they use the system when it comes to actual consensus rule changes that they're making, like, in their hard forking upgrades, their equivalent of our network upgrades.
Yeah, maybe a good next step would be to get someone from Ethereum to actually tell us what it is that they actually do.
Yeah, and the issue on any proof of work chain with spinning up testnets is that you need sort of some significant mining power for that testnet to be stable, not to sort of.
So Ethereum, one thing they did for many, so it depends on the testnet, but they have proof of authority for a bunch of testnets where it just checks for signatures from a timestamping server, basically, as an expedient. I don't know if we want to do that, but the rationale is obvious why that's helpful.
Nate, are we still on the same topic, or are you moving on to a different one?
Well, same topic. Yeah, okay. I wanted to share, like, so part of the motivation that's most direct is it could be the case, although I don't know how likely, that we will want development of ZSAs and development of changes for proof of stake happening concurrently. And it'd be really nice if we could kind of develop those independently without needing to synchronize the changes to sort of prove them out and consider them separately, and then do a later step of figuring out how to safely integrate them. If the community wants both changes, right? So if we can keep them unbundled, it's helpful for independent development. This requires less coordination, and it's also helpful because we can make the decision separately about when and how to integrate them instead of making it up front. So that's one motivation. The other motivation is the easier we could make it, and I hear that it sounds like it may be really challenging, but the easier we could make it, the lower cost or the lower barrier to entry it would be for new teams to come in who want to work on protocol teacher changes. So if there's any way we can lower that cost, it sounds like it's difficult, but that's just the longer term motivation is if we can lower that cost, it might be really helpful for getting more teams involved in protocol development.
Yeah. I think Adi had his hand up next.
Yes, so I know we discussed about the testnets and having multiple testnets live. Is there a way an architecture can be set up to have a closed testnet and only expose the RPCs and specific APIs that some people might want to experiment with? For example, a testnet for ZSAs would be like a closed testnet server, open RPC to the outside world, which can use a custom edition of a light client to try out different transaction types, but not take part in the testnet consensus.
Yes, the same way that you would do that with plain Zcashd. You would essentially, the way to do that would be to run Zcashd in ridge test mode, and then just have the RPC exposed. And so it's completely separated from any other network. And then you just expose the RPC. It's it's not tied to anything real, and you just have a local script that just every so often, hits the generate API to make a block.
That's great to hear. So is that something more optimal versus allowing anyone to take part in the testnet, I think running their own testnet node? What works the best?
Well, I guess that comes back to what is it that the testnet is trying to achieve, which gets back to Nate's point of like, what is the purpose of the testnet? Is it to check interoperability and confirm behavior of consensus nodes? Is it to enable people to test their mining implementations? Is it which we do see on main testnet? You'll see the difficulty suddenly spike and then drop back down as people test things there. Like is it for people testing their light wallet interactions? Like this is actually something we're making easier. Testnets or testnets in a box would make it easier for people to not expect the main testnet to do all of those things for them. But then it also comes down to knowing those use cases.
Deirdre?
Yeah, for making sure we can test major work independently, feature branches, as long as if they don't have major consensus nodes, rules that may collide, you can talk to a feature branch build of Zebra or Zcashd to test your ZSA wallet work. You can do a different testnet build of proof of stake, things like that. We can get away with a lot of not blocking each other by developing against like a main feature branch. We don't have to merge every incremental move towards ZSAs or towards proof of stake to main every time. So there's that. For things that you want to deploy and make sure this build of Zcashd or ZebraD talks a different set of consensus rules to like verify ZSA transactions, for example, that may need a separate testnet or something like that. But if we're at that point, I almost would rather just move to full-on testnet. If we're at that point of actually trying to test the different consensus rules, but we can get away with a lot with feature branches.
One thing I'll say about using main testnet, using the primary testnet in the run up to a network upgrade, is there will be people who want to test against the current set of consensus rules, and there will be people who want to test against the future set of consensus rules. So that's something that's really important to bear in mind.
We had precisely this problem with NU5, and also I think we had it with Sapling. Yeah. I mean, maybe just one extra testnet for the whatever is proposed for the next upgrade is sufficient. I think we floated that idea before. So you would upgrade the sort of the more conservative testnet only after the upgrade had happened on mainnet.
Staging that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really interesting to hear from somebody in the Ethereum community how they do things. And also we should probably talk with Kedit to find out whether they've been thinking about this, because we're speculating about what they might need, and it may be that they've already done quite a fair amount of thinking about this. Okay, any more research and implementation status updates? Okay, I want to give a quick advert for our new miner grants program, which we launched this week. This is intended to complement the major grants program, which is now rebranded as Zcash Community Grants. The maximum grant size will be $25,000, and the budget in this initial round of the program will be $75,000. So that could be 3 big grants or 20 small grants. This is being funded out of the Zcash Foundation's slice of the dev funds. Like I said, it is distinct from the Zcash Community Grants program. And the foundation will filter applications for suitability, and then we will poll Zcap to ask their opinion on which grants should be funded. So doing things a little bit differently from what's been done in the past. The deadline for applications is the morning UTC time of Monday, the 20th of March. So if you are interested in getting an application in, visit zcashgrants.org, and if you scroll down to ZF Minor Grants, you'll be able to find a link to the blog post with all the information, or you can just visit the Zcash Foundation blog. Adi.
Yeah, thanks for this super awesome announcement. From the community side, I just want to ask if there are certain examples of categories of grants that you might suggest the community to look into.
No, we want the community to come up with as wide a variety of grant ideas as they want. We like I said, we will filter applications to ensure that the purpose of the grant is congruent with the Zcash Foundation's mission and the 501c3 sort of restrictions. I will also be exercising judgment to determine whether we believe that the applicants can deliver on the grant. But other than that, I think I wouldn't want to say anything that might inhibit the community's creativity and restrict their ability to come up with ideas for this program.
Yep. Good luck to applicants.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've already had one open discussion. Any other topics that anybody wants to raise? I have one, but I'll give other people an opportunity to raise their hands. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'll just talk briefly about my one. We've been talking internally. It was actually Tior who raised this idea about whether we need better network monitoring of the Zcash network. And obviously there is a team working on the Ziggurat tool set for assessing and monitoring the Zcash network. But I just wanted to see if there was appetite for maybe having this as a specific agenda item on the agenda for a future Arborist call to maybe get Ziggurat in and get them to maybe give a little overview of what they've done so far and what they're working on as part of their current grant, and then to have a bit of an open discussion around what it would be nice to see in terms of improvements or further network monitoring.
Sounds good to me.
Does anybody think that is not a good idea? Adi.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I would want to hear from Ziggurat from a while now regarding their status and updates. And network monitoring is definitely super important. Just today, actually, 2 different miners had contacted me saying that they had issues with Zcash mining in terms of the rewards suddenly dropping for them, and that suddenly a high amount of mining is happening in shielded pools. So some of them, this is again open concern, they were concerned, what if someone is trying to attack Zcash? So just throwing it out there, it's not something casual, but it'll be good to have a network monitoring dashboard to see real-time changes in things that are fluctuating.
Yeah. Do you have any more? So you weren't very specific about what changed for these miners. What was it that changed? Their payouts dropped, but what was that actually caused that to happen?
One criteria was that the rewards dropped suddenly since this January. And some miners noticed that a large portion of mining was happening to the shielded pool. So they don't know who these new miners are.
Okay, has difficulty increased?
It's been the same. That was the whole concern.
Okay.
I mean, it could be existing miners switching to support shielded Coinbase, because there is an advantage of using shielded Coinbase is that you don't have to wait 100 blocks before the Coinbase matures.
Yeah, I would suggest they post to the forums and detail exactly what it is that they're seeing.
Okay, I'll ask the person. I actually did ask them to register on the forums, because right now the only team they're talking to is the Luxor mining team, and even they don't have the questions, the answers to the questions.
Okay. Yeah, I think more information will be needed to even begin to figure out what the answer to those questions would be.
Right, and the network monitoring will definitely help keep tab on these changes.
Yeah.
So I mean, if the total hash rate hasn't increased, and they are the pools that are saying this are doing the same amount of work, then they should be getting the same mining rewards. And
that's the complaint. That is, rewards suddenly dropped, randomly dropped.
So, well, so Adi, who are these mining pools who are coming to you, or are these individual miners who are signing up to mining pools?
Correct, individual miners.
Okay.
Well, that's not something that an individual miner, like if the miner's rewards suddenly drop, that's something that they need to be talking to their mining pools about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's not something like if the hash rate is staying the same, then the block reward going out is staying the same. It's being divided amongst the mining pools as it is. It's up to the how the mining pools are managing their what they're bringing in.
Yeah,
and
it's not a protocol issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask them to tell them to post details in the forums, and then we might be able to have her. But yeah, Tior.
One possibility, and of course we need more details to confirm, is that one way that you can lose funds while mining is if there are chain forks. And so if your mining pool is continually mining on a fork that isn't actually making it into the final chain, then what will happen is you won't get payouts for those blocks that get orphaned. So that's a possibility. There are other possibilities as well, like the reward schemes of the pools changing, or the templates that the pools are sending not keeping up to date with the latest block. All sorts of different alternatives. But yeah, if they can post details, happy to help.
Yeah,
I think without details, all we can do is speculate.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have seen issues in the past where, like the round trip time of getting a block template and going all the way through the mining process and then back out has had timing issues due to things like heavy block load or network propagation issues and things. And so from that side of things, we continue to make changes to try and make the network as operate as smoothly as possible under the load that it can and or does have. But there's the protocol will if the protocol is full and things are taking time, well then that's part of the protocol. And there's only so much that we can do at the protocol level to smooth that out if the network's just under that that much load.
Understood.
Yeah, and it's possible that Zip 317 will help there.
Mark.
I mean, if they were individual miners, what could happen is that other miners from the pool just left and changed to another pool, and then the whole pool has lower rewards, and then the miners, individual miners at the same pool have like lower rewards.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, without more details, all we can do right now is speculate and guess. So,
yeah, the individual has confirmed they'll be posting on the forum.
Great. Cool. Any other topics anyone would like to raise for open discussion? Okay. In that case, let's bring the call to a close. Thank you everyone for attending and participating. The next call will be in 2 weeks in the earlier time slot, intended to facilitate participation by people in Europe and east of Europe. So thank you.
I'm flagging because it's currently 5 minutes to midnight here.
Yeah, we are likely going to have to like think about the timings in future weeks because I think this is probably the first meeting that's starting to get affected by daylight savings confusion month. So there will likely be some movement in these in the next, by the time we get 2 weeks from, well, 4 weeks from now for this particular time slot. So we may need to adjust.
Paco, did you want to say something?
Agree to that. Is 9 p.m. here.
Okay, well, let's not try and solve that now. I'm going to leave that up to Ian to manage the scheduling.
I'm not good at time zones either. I always come with my fingers many times.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. We'll say good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be. I think we've got all of those.
Thank you all.
All of those here on the call. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.